Are y'all ready to head off the trails? I'm the cryptid huntress, Jessica Jones, and I'm ready to take you on a mysterious journey right now. We welcome you to Off the Trails right here on the Spaced Out Radio's YouTube channel. If you guys haven't hit subscribe yet, please do. We would love to have you guys. And shout out to Bumblefoot for that amazing intro music. I always appreciate it. All right, y'all. Please go follow us on Twitter at Spaced Out Radio, on Instagram at Spaced Out Radio Show, and on TikTok at Spaced Out Radio. Y'all can find me at thecryptidhuntress.com, where all of my shows are posted daily. And I have a lot of shows. Okay. And all the events that I'm going to be speaking at, all the public events, those are all on my website. So you guys, please go check that out. And that's a great way to get in touch with me if you have any kind of suggestions for remote viewing targets, or if you just want to drop in and say, what's up? Y'all go through my website. There's a little box that pops up. So come say, hey. All right. Okay. Also, if you'd like to support what I do, I have a Patreon. That's the Cryptid Huntress over on Patreon. Shout out to all of my Patreon members. I love you guys. Thank you so much for all your support. It does mean the absolute world to me. And also, I have a shop. It's called War Woman Goods. That's over on Etsy. And I do appreciate all the support there too, as well. If you like old Native American, antique, vintage, turquoise jewelry, y'all go check that out. Okay. Awesome, y'all. Well, I have a fantastic guest here tonight. I have my friend Jason Mclean of Serial Papers and Jason Mclean Questions Everything and Mysterious Library. Okay, he's here. We used to do a bunch of shows together back in the day. We still do occasionally over on Texas Front Porch. And he's an awesome dude. He's here. Don't forget that right after this show, Marquise has an amazing show set up with After Hours here on Spaced Out Radio. So you guys go check that out, but not a minute before my show's over. Okay. Y'all stick with me tonight because we have a lot to unpack. We're talking Goatman. Okay. Tonight. This is something I've been wanting to talk about for a long time. Okay. And I picked the right person to come on tonight. His name is Jason Mclean. He's witness to a living pterosaur. He's an author, illustrator, and biblical paranormal researcher. Jason Mclean has authored and illustrated numerous books, including How UFOs and Bigfoot Prove the Bible is True and Metroplex Monsters. He can be found weekly on Jason Mclean Questions Everything and the Mysterious Library on Untold Radio Network. On YouTube, these are all on YouTube, okay, where he discusses cryptozoology, ufology, forbidden archaeology, the paranormal, and all sorts of other stuff. So please help me welcome to Space Out Radio tonight, my buddy, Jason Mclean.
Hey, Jessica.
Well, hey, Jason. Long time no see. How are you?
Yeah, so far so good. Well, it's not too long. We were just on Donnie Cho's show talking about pineapple pizza.
Pineapple and ham pizza. And let me tell you, yes. I actually had some of that with me that day and took a big old bite of it during the show. Mm-hmm. And I thought Donnie was going to have a heart attack. That was funny.
Yep. Oh, I loved it. It was a lot of fun. Again, pineapple. I like pineapple on my pizza. It's not my favorite one, right? Like, but I know, right? I can dig it. Now the question is whether or not Goatman likes pineapple pizza. That's the real question.
Ooh, I don't know. I don't know what Goatman likes to eat. Actually, that's a really good question, Jason. He doesn't like pizza, though. You don't think? Do they eat? Are they flesh and bone or are they etherical? I don't know. I have no idea. But listen, Jason, I grew up hearing stories about Goatman and Goatman's Bridge. I mean, they're all over the country, especially here in the South. We have a lot of Goatman stories, but particularly Texas. Texas is full of Goatmen, and you're from Texas.
Yes,
what you know about Goatman?
So I grew up in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex. Hence Metroplex Monsters, right? Dallas Demons, Fort Worth Goatmen, and other terrors of the Trinity River. Available wherever fine books and trashy rags are sold. That's the
great book, plug. Amazing book, y'all. We got to go get this book, Metroplex Monsters. It's so good. Thank you, Jason. Sorry.
No, you're fine. So before we get too far into Goatman himself, we kind of need to put down where a lot of the mythos, because basically every town has a Goatman's Bridge.
It does
in this area, right? Particularly the Iron Trust bridges. Everyone knows about the one in Denton, right? Old Alton Bridge. That's what makes all the shows. People go out there and they do the recordings. It's an old Iron Trust bridge. And again, those, like you said, those stories are basically everywhere. I actually went there. It's an interesting conversation. But here's the thing. We don't really see the name Goatman associated with anything in North Texas by and large until the Lake Worth Monster event, right? Which most people see as a Bigfoot, because it was. But the thing is, Jim Mars, in his initial reports, calls it a Goatman because the hair was sort of, he said it was hairy like a goat, so he calls it a Goatman. Well, from that point on, the name, because it was such a big event here in the area, like people went out there. Again, this is one of those things where once it was reported on WFAA, the local radio station at the time, or the big one at the time, like people went out to Lake Worth to look for this thing. Which is why there's that sighting with dozens of people, right, including police officers in broad daylight. Well, the name Goatman then gets associated with other Bigfoot sightings that occur later that year. But then also all of these areas where you had stories of the creature or the monster, which goes back to the 1800s, right? People would talk about this hairy man beast that would go up and down the creeks. Sound familiar? Well, that goes all the way back to the 1800s. So the thing is, now the name Goatman sort of overwrites all of the paranormal stories and accounts of Bigfoot essentially in North Texas, just everywhere. Everything becomes Goatman. The weird thing that occurs though is over time, people start seeing a Goatman, right? A lot of these bridges, like Old Foamy, right, which is down in Cleburne. I actually just drove through Cleburne this afternoon. It's the story there. Everyone has its own little story, but you start noticing when you look at them in totality, everyone sort of took the Jim Mars accounts of the Lake Worth Monster and superimposed them on these bridges and on these areas, right? Because of the name Goatman. But each one has a little difference to them. And but then people start seeing actual Goatmen. Probably the most famous examples is White Rock Lake, which is literally in Dallas, right? It's not in downtown Dallas, but it's in Dallas. People actually
very metropolitan.
Very metropolitan.
Okay. Yes, I've been there.
This is a little bit more off, it's a little bit off, but it's still like you're in a city, like it's not hidden. That being said, people see an actual Goatman. Sandy Grace is probably the most famous encounter. Nick Redfern wrote about her, right? Broad daylight. A Goatman, 7 foot tall, walks out of the bushes towards here, smiling, disappears in a flash of light.
Oh my gosh. Which makes it a little more supernatural. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
That's kind of supernatural.
Oh, it is. And again, I knew a guy. Like in the other report that I have in here was sort of exclusive to me. I knew him. I'd known him for years. He never told me this story. But he and his friends encounter apparently the same creature, but at night. Him and a whole group of friends saw him. And the thing is, you get like a mile or 2 miles away from White Rock Lake proper. Similarly sized entities are seen, but it's almost like some of the specific details melt, and they almost look kind of alien-esque, right?
Yes, that's in your book.
Yeah, but they're more and again, Old Alton Bridge. I've got a story that happens like a quarter of a mile from Old Alton Bridge on the same road, and the creature doesn't look anything like it, like Goatman himself, right? It
looks like an alien, right?
Yeah,
it's almost like they're all kind of melding together, Jason. It's interesting.
Right. And that's part of the question I have about the whole Goatman phenomena is it seems like by imposing the name Goatman on these places, locations, on these other stories, they sort of took on this Goatman appearance, right? But then, if for any reason, if they're just far enough away from that central point of thought, they seem to sort of take not amorphous, but a less distinct form. They still have the backwards facing legs, but they don't seem to have the hooves per se. They're missing the horns. They were missing the hair, and they start looking more, what we'd consider like a gray.
Okay. Do you know what this is reminding me of too?
Mhm.
Is the Jersey Devil.
Yes.
Okay.
Oh,
And
yeah.
and so when I did a show on the Jersey Devil, it was actually
Mhm.
given to me as a blind remote viewing target. Okay.
Mhm.
And I was seeing a goat man, Jason.
Mhm.
That's what I thought I was remote viewing when I got done with the target. I thought I was remote viewing a goat man. And I
Mhm.
think it was because of maybe the backwards legs. They had like goat legs kind of.
Mhm.
And I think I have a picture of the way it was
Mhm.
described. Similarly, but not really, because they're all different.
Yeah.
There's so many different types of Jersey Devils. Sorry, the Jersey Devil.
Mhm.
There's so many different types. This is one of the illustrations, which looks like a deer
Mhm.
bat. I don't know what that is.
Well,
Kangaroo
so
looking something.
yeah. So here's the thing, right? Um, all of these depictions are based on an illustration that came out in the Philadelphia. I want to say it was the Philadelphia newspaper.
No.
It was right after a mass sighting in broad daylight. The thing is, what he did was he took the descriptions that as speaking as an artist, what he did was he took the descriptions literally, not seriously, because what they're trying
Okay.
to do is convey a thought as to what it is that they actually saw. And they were using the animals at the time that were familiar to them,
Oh,
right?
okay.
He didn't take it, but he didn't take them seriously. The thing is, if you go back and look at it, at what they were describing, it's very clearly a pterosaur. However, here's the thing: this is where the whole where this ties into
Oh.
what you saw ties into what we're seeing down here in Dallas. The problem is, it once you create sort of an image of these creatures in your head, right? Even if someone sees like a Bigfoot or a pterosaur, the mythology itself takes up its own life seemingly, and either is creating these creatures or is
Mhm.
allowing something to take that form, right?
Whoa.
Because this is where it gets weird, because let's be honest, there's no reason for a goat man to exist literally, right? Like there's no organic reason for something, for a chimeric example, for that to exist. But you go
Right.
back to the beginning of time, the earliest story we have, the Epic of Gilgamesh. How were
Gilgamesh.
they
Enkidu. Yeah,
Enkidu? Exactly. How did they depict Enkidu? Literally gave him a bull's legs and horns.
that's right. I may have a
The
picture of that actually.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Let's
I
see if
mean,
I do.
while you're looking, yeah, that's him right there. That's Enkidu.
That's it.
And you notice how tall Gilgamesh is as well. By the
Well,
way,
he's holding a
oh,
tiger or lion, something.
lion, yes. Hmm.
Lion.
That's a very common depiction for Gilgamesh. Um, so again, Enkidu was a giant. He has these horns. Again, they associate him with a bull, but it's the same motif, right?
Mhm.
The Indo-Russian story of the Leshy is a very similar description. Why do you think we depict demons the way we do? The Shahadim of the Hebrew Bible, which we often translate as demon, essentially, they were the goat ones or the hairy ones. They were depicted as goat demons, right?
Yeah.
This imagery goes back as far as we have them. And again, whether you're talking about Pan, from Greek mythology, which is just like the highest form of the satyr or the faun, right? Depending
Mhm.
on what you're talking about, the Greeks or the Romans. The simple fact of the matter is, this imagery just exists all throughout time, which
Wow.
begs the question: is this what they look like, or is this sort of a form that that they've given to us? And I don't want to get too far off into the tulpa per se, but does it allow them access to us? Because it seems like they want these things seem to want us to have this idea of this image in their head. And it seems to give them the ability to come into our world more than necessarily that is what they really look like. Because again, once they get away from those locations, they seem to be a lot more amorphous, or less
Mhm.
distinct, which begs that question: are we co-creating them, giving them that
Ooh.
physical form, or is that what they really look like, and they want us to give them that power to manifest in that way? Because at a
I
certain
love
point,
this.
we need to really ask these questions. All of the ancient, no matter how far back you go, everyone's like, hey, don't talk about these things, right? Even a few hundred years ago, they say don't talk about it. It doesn't matter what culture you go to: Asia, Indo-Russia, Mesopotamia, the Native Americans here. Everyone's like, what? Don't use their proper names. don't talk about them directly. The Irish talk about the Fae folk. They would talk about them as the neighbors or the good people.
Okay, that reminds me, Jason, that reminds me of not only skinwalkers, even though we're not supposed to say that word, and demons.
Yeah.
You don't say their names, right?
Correct. But which is my point, right? When I see multiple cultures all saying the exact same thing, even if there's differences in nuance or differences in specifics, but they all generally have the same idea, it's because there's probably something to it. Like the whole Wendigo, right? You get into the actual story of Wendigo, if you want to be a little bit more precise. It is something that it is a spirit that possesses someone for breaking a cultural taboo. Most people mistake them for skinwalkers, and they're a very different thing. But if you look at the actual stories and then go back and look at the original stories of werewolves from like the Romanian areas, right? The Eastern European areas. It's the original stories of werewolves wasn't that you transformed, at least from that area, wasn't that you transformed into a wolf per se, but rather you would put on a belt, like a magic belt, or you broke a cultural taboo and you would become possessed by this spirit and you would become a werewolf. It wasn't that you physically changed, but you would go out and you would damage people, you would hurt people, eat people. Cannibalism is a common theme both in the Wendigo and werewolf stories. When you start seeing these parallels in these cultures that are completely unconnected, you need to start thinking maybe it's because there's a reality to it. We're not supposed to talk about demons per se. We're not supposed to talk about the fae folk per se. We're not supposed to talk about these things. Why? Well, maybe because talking about them gives them power and attracts them to you. You're giving them authority to come to you, or you're giving them authority to enter into our world in a more material way than what they're normally allowed to. I think perhaps we underestimate our own power in that and our own authorities.
That's right. Wow. So basically we can manifest these things. And what I find very interesting is that the Goatman bridges, because it's always under a bridge. There's these things that are constant in every Goatman sighting. It seems like they're around bridges, abandoned houses or behind houses or something like that. But it's mostly bridges, and it has something to do with where Satanists go and do rituals. Okay. Witches, there's Ouija boards there. And there's, there's one of the bridges that I was reading about. I don't know if it was the one where Ghost Adventures did their show there, but someone actually painted a Ouija board into the boards of that bridge.
Yeah, that's Old Alton Bridge. Yeah, absolutely. It's funny is if it wasn't used by Satanists before the legend, it is now.
It is
right?
now. Yeah.
Because there's multiple legends about where the Goatman comes from. And again, if you look at them, because they've changed over time, right? I talk about that in the book a lot, but one of the things you start noticing is they're all derivations of the Hanging Man story, which every bridge has. Right? Everyone has this story of the innocent man, or even a guilty man who's hanged on a bridge, and he haunts the bridge for some reason, right?
And the ones in Texas have to do with back in the, I'm going to say Jim Crow era, right? Like with the,
some of the stories.
I'm just going to go say it. Yeah. It's and so people being hung on the bridge and then coming back and haunting that place. But it's always like a life lesson too, especially for the youth.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Like you said. Absolutely.
There's a lot of different, there's three main versions, right? But the two that sort of stand out the most is the most recent one is again, it's a black man who's hanged. But the earlier version seems to be again of a white man who had killed children, right? So either way, it's either it was the Klan who was destroying the life of a prosperous black man, and that's the lesson we're supposed to take from is that he's haunting it because because he was done wrong, and to tell the story of the evils of racism. The other version of the story, the earlier version, seems to be talking about again that there's evil men out there and you shouldn't be going out doing, and evil men will pay, but that evil can maybe even transcend, because when he's hanged, he's decapitated, and apparently his head falls into the river and disappears. And so looking for his head, finds a goat and rips it off the body and puts it as his own head. But again,
Oh,
these stories are all, you can find derivations of these stories literally everywhere, because that's the folklore, right? But the folklore itself
yeah.
is not the phenomenon. And I think that's one of the things we always have to keep in mind is folklore is important, but it's not the phenomena itself. And when you see the phenomena as is described by modern witnesses and what people actually see themselves versus what they say is seen, it starts painting a very different picture, right?
It
That
does.
there's that there is, this is much more complicated than we want it to be. And it goes back to even what is the question of what is real? Because people say, well, is it real? Is it not? What do you mean by real? Do you mean, are people making it up? No, they are not. They're clearly not making up these stories.
That's right.
But are they real in the way that these creatures are natural biological entities like you and I or a dog? It's clear that they aren't. They are clearly paranormal. The bigger question is, why are they taking that form? They seem to want us they seem to want to attract us there. Are we giving them abilities to be there? Are we somehow feeding them? Are we giving them more power? Right? When this goes back into the idea of the satanic rituals, are they summoned by them, or is that part of the lore to maybe just keep them in our minds? Because again, Baphomet is depicted essentially as a goat man, and I don't think that's a coincidence.
Okay, so I just had a thought when I
Mhm.
was in high school, Jason.
Mhm.
Okay, so I've been interested in the paranormal my entire life. When I was in high school, I'm just going to go ahead and date myself so y'all know it was in the late '90s. Okay, I was in high school. I was really big into mass media, and I did a lot of stories that aired out over my school on Fridays, and it had to deal with a lot of paranormal stuff that went on, from fortune tellers in the area to
Mhm.
Pig Man's house. Okay,
Yes.
and what I did was I covered the local legends and lore of our area, and I actually have the tapes. I have the VHS tapes to this day at my mom's house. Okay, where my friends and I in my class, we were able to go out and film these things during the day during school. Okay, so I love doing this. So we went out to Pigman's house
Mhm.
in where I lived in my hometown. And the
Yes.
story went, and I read this actually in your book too, because I
Mhm.
remember it correlating. There's a story of a man who murdered his family and
Yeah.
buried their bodies under the house. And this in this house, it's like an old rickety house, and it's in the back in the woods. And we would go there late at night. I did it, so I know this is real. We went there at night, and I'm not saying that I couldn't find any records of a man killing his family there, but
Right.
you walk into the house during the daytime, and I have this on film. The front living room, the floor is dug out, like out, and then the ground is dug down like 6 feet into the ground, and they say that's where he buried his family. So you go
Oh
there late
wow.
at night, Jason, and something runs out from behind the house and chases you out of there. And it's like a human sized humanoid person back there in the middle of nowhere, and it chased us out every time we went.
Oh
Um,
wow.
so yeah, so we have a pigman, but it's a same similar story to what
Yeah, it's
Goatman
the
is.
same story.
Someone who killed. I
Mhm.
mean, and I actually experienced this when I was in high
Yeah.
school.
No, you could sort of throw the whole Slender Man thing into this, because and
Yeah.
I think he's a great example of this, where we know Slender Man is fake lore, meaning it was never real. This isn't folklore that actually existed. So we know who created it, when it was created, right? And yet the fake lore goes out, and all of a sudden, after very very short period of time, people start seeing Slender Man, and people start talking about seeing him out in the woods or interacting with him. Some some young girls tried to murder their friend to appease him, right?
That's right. Very demonic.
It's
Yeah.
very right. And it goes back to this idea of, okay, well, hold on. How is it this thing that we know was created, and yet people are seeing him? It's like saying, hey, people see Spider-Man in the real world, right? It's like that shouldn't happen, but it does with him. Ironically, as far as comic book characters, people who actually wrote John Constantine. It is Constantine, not Constantine. The comics are very
Okay.
clear on that. But people who were writing him, who were writing his stories, have talked about seeing him in the real world. They're like, no, this wasn't a man cosplaying as John Constantine. It was John Constantine, and it freaked
Okay.
them out. The guy who created him, um, Alan, I think it was Alan Moore who created them. If not, it was Neil Gaiman. But I think it was Alan Moore. Believes in essentially word magic, right? That you speak and you can create these things.
Oh,
Again, it's not just one person. Numerous authors who worked on his comics while they were working on them have talked about encountering John Constantine. So it seems as if we as humans have the ability to either create these creatures or give, I'm just going to say it, demonic forces the ability to enter into our universe and interact with us in those forms if we give them that power and that authority. And it seems like a lot of the same reason we have these repetitions of ideas is to generate the lore, and the lore then allows them in. Did you ever see it was not the most recent, but it was supposed to be the last Freddy Krueger movie that they did. It was the last one Robert Englund did.
I don't think I saw that, but I love those movies.
I think it's called Final Nightmare. I may be wrong on that one.
Okay.
But it's actually my favorite. It ends up being like a movie within a movie within a movie, right? They're making the movie of this new Freddy Krueger movie, and the actress who played the main woman in the original film, she's back as herself, right? Talking about this film. Anyway, she's like, but Freddy Krueger's coming out. He's alive. Well, they actually talked. There's this interview with Wes Craven in the film itself, and Wes is saying, hey, we have told stories, these horror stories, all throughout time because it keeps this demon trapped within the story. If we stop telling the story, he comes into our world. And okay, so spoiler alert for a movie that's probably 30 years old at this point. The climax is she goes into its lair, and there's these elements of all these different stories, like Hansel and Gretel, right? And Freddy Krueger, but all these other elements, and she ends up killing him in his own lair, where he's got Freddy's head, but it's clearly like a snake body, right? But you have all these elements of all these different stories in it, and of course, the end of the film is he closes the book, meaning that he had written the whole thing as a movie within a movie within a movie. But it's this idea that that these things seem to need us to allow them into our world, and that perhaps our own mythologies and our own stories are actually detrimental to us because we are giving them access to us instead of doing what the ancients did and our great grandparents did, which is you don't give them names, you don't tell the name, you don't call them by name, and you don't talk about them. We've thrown all that away, and now we've created a multi-billion-dollar enterprise of all these different television shows, and this includes me. I'm in on this. Seriously, I'm in on it, right? But it's like, well, have we almost generated these things now? Like maybe the reason we're seeing more of the paranormal is because we're giving the paranormal access to us in ways that we haven't before.
Oh my gosh, Jason, just look at the music industry right now. Okay.
Yes.
That all these concerts where people they're doing like satanic rituals on stage and like black masses and stuff. Like,
yes,
it's really scary and really terrible. And, as far as like the spells go and things like that, I do not allow my son to wear clothes that say bored on it or anything that's like self-deprecating, okay? Because those are spells. Like I did a little experiment, right? And it was kind of funny, and I did it as a joke, but I'd seen these, I bought these Adidas sneakers, right? And they said superstar on them, and I have no intention to ever be a superstar whatsoever in my life, but I was kidding around, right? And I took a picture and I put it on Instagram and I said, hey, words are spells, right? Let's see where this goes. And I was just kidding. And that was like 3 years ago. And I was like, I'm still not a superstar. Okay. But however, it's like putting that positive energy out there, like the positive stuff. I didn't even know that those shoes said superstar. Okay. Like it wasn't even like a big deal, but it's all about the intention, and our words are 100% spells. That's why a lot of people don't even say good morning anymore. They say grand rising. Okay. It's stuff as small as that, because I don't want to go around saying demons names and stuff. So this is the reason that I quit watching Ghost Adventures, Jason, was because of that Goatman Bridge episode. Okay. I quit watching them. It was I felt like they were chanting rituals Okay.
Yeah.
I'm not cool with people chanting rituals in my television,
No.
coming through my portal of my television into my home. And I felt as though they were chanting rituals and it was invading my space. And so I
Yes.
muted it. I hit the mute button. Okay. And I suggest everybody else does that too. Okay. If you ever feel like somebody's putting a ritual, like doing a chant or whatever, and you're watching a show, mute it. Okay. Turn it off. Don't
Yes.
allow it. Do not comply with that.
Yo, yeah, there's too many accounts. I mean, far too many accounts of people hearing, rituals being performed on television and stuff happening in their homes. The entire idea of the hitchhiker phenomena is the fact that you were present somewhere where something occurred and it's able to follow you home, because even by observing it, even if you're not physically there, just by observing it and hearing it, you become a participant in it, or at least somewhat spiritually liable, which gives these things access to you. I've got numerous accounts of people saying, hey, I just watched this video and now these things are happening in my home.
Okay.
I'm right there with you. I don't like that. It happened to me when I was watching the latest Doctor Strange film. Like, most of that stuff's usually kept pretty tame, but there's this one scene, and while it was happening, I'm like, whoa, something, like the atmosphere of the movie changed. I'm like, no, this isn't the movie. I'm feeling something actually in the theater with us. Like, this is, and like leaving it, I could feel it trying to come with me. I'm like, I had to pray it, break the binding of the whole 9 years. I'm like, this is not kosher. And it wasn't like, there's fantasy, but then there's, hold on, why are Hollywood films going out and getting actual occultists to tell them how to do real rituals? Why in the world would you want a real ritual in a film or a television show? And yet they're enmeshed within Hollywood, and they've been so for decades now, where they're like, yeah, well, here's the witches we go and get so that they can make certain that all of our stuff's arranged properly. Why? Because there's power there.
That's
and
right.
that, and if you get millions of eyes on something, how much power is that going to have? So it's not just us in our shows and whatever. At this point, I think probably the cat's out of the bag, so there's no real harm in talking about it in general. But
right.
The simple fact of the matter is, there was a time when we didn't give these things necessarily names, and we were far more careful about what we said because of the danger. Well, now that, like I said, cat's out of the bag, and it may be that we've given these things far more access to us than they've had in maybe thousands of years. And that may be part of what we're seeing in the world today. I was actually on a show with Ryan Tremblay, and one of the questions we were talking about behind the scenes was, the whole Wendigo thing is, if you break a cultural taboo, that's what allows the thing access to you, right? And Brandy from Blondes and Booze said, well, you feel like you figured he'd have a lot of business today considering everything that's going on. And I stopped and I said, well, hold on, weren't we just talking about, before the show started, all of these weird people these weird psychos who, because I'm not into true crime, but seems like every woman I know is into true crime. It's starting to worry me a little bit.
I quit after first 48 because I felt like I was going to manifest that into my home. And guess what? They started filming it on my street where I lived.
Ooh,
and so I completely quit watching it. Yeah. I felt like I was manifesting it my way.
Yeah. That's probably a wise decision. I don't want to be on that, but
I saw what was coming.
Exactly. And one of the things she mentioned before the show was all these stories of these weird psychopaths who just see everything seems normal, then one day they snap, and like they're always eating people, right? There's always some form of ritual cannibalism. Exactly.
Totally. What the heck?
And I just stopped and I'm like, well, hold on, Brandy. You said the Wendigo should have a lot of takers, but weren't we just before the show talking about all these weird nutso psychopaths who just go out and do these terrible, horrible things to people? And it's always seemingly including ritualized cannibalism. Maybe that's not an abnormality. Maybe it's the problem is Wendigo's got all the business in the world he could ever want. What if everyone's like, why is everything going crazy right now? Maybe it's because we literally just opened up every gate to hell. And because of what's been going on the last 40 years.
Thanks, CERN. Yeah,
exactly. Thank you, CERN.
Right. Thanks,
CERN, musicians, all these things.
I got another one. Jason, I got another one. Okay. So I was watching something. Now, this is alleged, you guys. I don't want to get in trouble for this, but it's allegedly. I watched this video, and I can't say this is positively for sure, but I saw it with my own eyes. It was liquid death. They allegedly take witches into their warehouses, and they perform rituals to summon demons to get into their water. Okay. They summon demons to get into the canned water. The liquid death is canned water. Okay. So beware, everybody. And you know what? Most people that drink that have no clue, but you're drinking demons, allegedly. Allegedly. I love that word. You got to always say that, right?
Allegedly. Yeah.
Yeah. But it's like we're doing all this stuff. Like, I do not consent. Okay. I don't consent to allowing demons into my abode. Okay. Or my body, my temple, my whatever. It's not allowed. Okay. And so the first step is becoming aware of these things, Jason. Right. Yeah.
Yes. No, exactly. Just understand this stuff is that there's a reality. It goes back to, what is the question of real? The problem is, for decades now, people say, oh, none of that's real. It's only folklore. It's only tall tales. Well, yeah, maybe the stories around the phenomena, again, the folklore itself is fake. There's stories that are told, but that doesn't mean the phenomena itself isn't real. It's quite real. People encounter these things. We need to be aware of them so that we don't draw danger to ourselves. Tex came up with a really interesting phrase. I wish I'd come up with it. It's a very astute observation. He calls it sudden acute possession. How often do we hear of everything? Some dude's walking around, everything's fine. The next thing you know, he's unfortunately committed suicide, or he's done some terrible, terrible thing. And you think, what just happened here? One of the conversations I've had with several friends of mine who were police officers, I said, homicide detectives, I just asked them, like, hey, have you ever heard because you see it in movies and television shows, people saying, I don't know what came over me. I was like, it felt like I was out of my body and I was doing this horrible, horrible thing. Right. Well, I asked them, is that a real thing? They said, yes, absolutely. We hear all the time that you have these people who've done these horrible things, and they're telling you, they're like, I don't know what happened. It's like I saw myself committing these horrible crimes, but like I couldn't control myself. It may be entirely possible that those stories are real, because people haven't protected themselves, because they've engaged perhaps in things that made them vulnerable. They've damaged themselves, and maybe it doesn't have to be as extreme as doing or committing a heinous crime. Maybe it's something as subtle as just not engaging with life the way you should engage with life, right? And it's sort of like you're allowing things to keep you depressed, or keep you sad, or keep you unfocused from from your own life. It may be that Goatman is just a one slice of this entire phenomena that is probably much more damaging than we fundamentally realize, but it is a real aspect of it. People do see these things, but we need to, if we're going to talk about them, we need to understand them in their totality. And the fact that these things have been around for a long time, and they want to stay around, and maybe they're not exactly as they appear, like so much in this area.
Absolutely. And okay, so I've actually seen a picture of an actual real Goatman before on a trail cam. We're going to talk about that in just a second, but we have Android Paranormal in the chat wanting to know, Jason, are you familiar with the Goatman of Bowie, Maryland in the early 1970s, Prince George's County, Maryland?
It may. Okay, so here's the problem. And there's actually a spate of Goatman events in the late 60s, early 70s. So this is definitely one of them. I'm trying to remember if this is the one where he's wielding the axe. But there are several accounts, and I want to say this is it, but there's several stories about the same time of these Goatmen attacking people with an axe. And these are not just folk, like there's clearly some folk stories around them, but there are people seeing them do these things and kill and allegedly murdering people in front of them, and some of these murders are then say, oh no, the cops write them off as suicides, or they write them off as just missing people, right? So there does seem to be a real body count to this phenomena, but it's in multiple locations. Like, that's the weird thing. It's the same stories seem to appear at the same places, same kinds of places at the same time. So I mean, that's just what it is. And it's really, really weird. unless you realize that there's a reality to this phenomena, but that we somehow play a role in its creation, that perhaps our stories allow them that access, and they sort of take those forms that give them the most advantageous encounters with humanity.
Wow.
Advantageous to them, not to us.
Right. Oh my gosh, a Goatman wielding an axe. That's about as terrifying as it gets. That's a little more scary than Freddy Krueger, actually, in my book.
Yeah, that's what I'm right there with you. It's like, look,
right.
Like, okay, the whole glove thing seems, that's creepy and all, but yeah, an axe is going to do a lot more damage. So yeah, 7 foot tall Goatman with an axe, that seems way scarier.
It's like a, with horns and all that. Donnie Cho, thank you. Donnie Cho says stuff. You guys go please subscribe to Donnie Cho says stuff over on YouTube. Jason and I were lucky enough to have a discussion on pineapple and ham pizza not too long ago on there. And it did taste pretty good, Donnie. I'm sorry. I know Donnie doesn't like that kind of pizza, but he says, when someone does a ritual on my TV, I put on God of War on PlayStation. Demon, meet Kratos. Oh my gosh. Donnie, thank you for that super chat. That's so sweet of you. Yep. You're hilarious.
That's exactly what he would do too.
You keep us entertained, Donnie. Thank you. You're the best. Oh yeah. Okay. Yeah, we have so many great comments in here tonight too, and I think most of us have heard of stories of Goatmen in our local areas and things like that. I just can't imagine the number of Goatman sightings where you live. Do you think it's like a whole bunch of different Goatmen, or do you think it could potentially be one Goatman for the entire area?
That's a really great question, because it begs the question: is there even individuality within the phenomena? Right? This seems like a circuitous route, but give me a second on this. Okay. Like we talked about, there is this connection between Goatman and satanic rituals, right? One of the things I sort of saw, while, again, because of my own career, the real world that pays the bills, I noticed that there were houses. So I'm entitled. So we don't actually sell the houses, but we facilitate the paperwork and all that, right?
Okay.
When I was doing REO, meaning bank-owned properties that have been foreclosed and are being resold, it would be fairly common for them to be used as drug houses, right? People go in, they tear up the place, they use it for drugs, that kind of thing, for a couple days, and then they leave before people show up. But what was also not terribly uncommon was for them to be used for rituals, for satanic rituals. Now,
oh my gosh.
Yeah, exactly. And you'd see some of these pictures and you're like, okay, but the thing is, I started noticing some of these accounts were not teenagers messing around with spray paint, right? Like this, you see the pictures, and like this was a full-on ritual sacrifice of an animal. I won't go into too much detail, but we would have to have people, hazmat teams come in and clean it. But you start noticing that the sigils were the same, and they were done correctly. Like, these weren't just a bunch of punk kids, right? This was the real thing. So again,
well, it's a place of trauma, right? I don't mean to interrupt you, but like a house that's been like foreclosed on, like a lot of trauma and sadness and all that kind of stuff is at places like that. So, and it's not uncommon for people to buy a home and they find like a pentagram underneath, like etched into the hardwood floor.
Yes. Oh yeah. No, that's a lot more common than you think. But so I talked to a friend of mine who's, when I say high up, I mean high up in the police department. And I asked him, I said, hey, I can't help but notice. And doing the research for the book, I started, like, certain things kept popping up. I said, tell me if I'm onto something here, yes or no. There is either a very powerful satanic occult group that has been here for a long time, or there's multiple, but they are powerful and they've been here for a very, very long time. He said, yes, that is 100. He goes, 100% true. He's like, that's absolutely, he's like, yeah, and they are powerful. They've been here for a very long time.
And what is their point though? Why are they doing this? Like, going into places like that to conjure Goatmen?
Well, so that's the question, right? What is this connection? And one of the stories in the book talks about, Old Foamy, right? In Cleburne. Literally, it's just a bridge over a very small creek. Whether you think the story is true or not, this is a story that is a thing. And essentially, long story short, these kids, they go out there, they do the 3 honkings things, whatever. That's supposed to summon the Goatman, but what they end up getting is a bunch of people in dark robes coming after them. And they take off and they survive.
Oh my.
Like I said, with the old Alton Bridge, if it wasn't used for satanic rituals before, it is now. I don't know what the connection is between these Goatmen and these occult in these cultists, right? I don't know what that connection is. Is it causative? Is it just correlative? But again, you go back to the fact that these descriptions of these creatures seem to transcend culture and time. It may be that I have a sneaking suspicion. My working theory is that these occultists are not a new phenomenon. They've always been here. There was always this group that sort of stayed hidden. You think, oh, well, not back in the good old days. No, they were always there. They were always hiding. They would go to, church, they would go perform these rituals on Saturday, and then on Sunday morning they'd be in the Baptist church next to you, right? They hid in plain sight. But that's why they would go to these locations, was to do these things. Maybe the reason we always have these stories, and maybe again, why the bridge, the creeks have long been seen as liminal zones. Mm-hmm. Maybe it's because they are part of a tradition that goes back across cultures, thousands of years, because these entities want into our reality and they need us to do it. So there's a need for these groups to be going around and doing these things to give these things access to us. But again, perhaps the form is it's whatever form it can take, and it is somewhat dependent on the mythologies that are in the culture. When the fairy folk are of the culture, they look like fairies. When it's Goatman, they look like Goatman. Perhaps when it's the alien greys, they're the alien greys. It seems like these things, or when it's Lechusa, it's La Lechusa. Maybe these things take those forms that our cultures create, and that allows them access to it. And the further they get away from those points of power, the less defined they become, and perhaps the less effect on reality they can have.
Oh, Jason, I have so many things going through my mind right now because I've been doing a lot of, I've been doing shows and research and remote viewing on cryptids that are seen on battlefields where there's a lot of trauma and bloodshed, like old Green Eyes down here in Chickamauga, Georgia. Okay. And he was actually eating the dead soldiers on the field after the war was over. And during the war, during the battle there, it was like a 3-day battle. There's a lot of ritualistic blood I gotta say blood magic, I guess. I don't know what else to call it, where people are sacrificing people, or there's a lot of war going on right now. Do you think that potentially, and before you answer that, let me say, Doug Shelby, thank you for that question. I have never come across a staircase in the woods, but I have heard of them. I don't know where they're going. Don't walk up the staircase, y'all. If y'all see one of those, okay? Do not walk up there.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. Like, you know what? I've never run across one, but I maybe just walk the other way.
Absolutely don't do it. But okay, but I'm thinking like we're in a state of perpetual war all the time, Jason.
Yes.
Do you think, and knowing what we know now, I feel like there are people in charge of our different countries, okay, who could be satanic. They could do satanic rituals.
Yep.
I mean, according to what I've seen with my own eyes, I'm just saying allegedly, okay?
Yeah.
Could be potentially. What if they're causing all these wars, all this bloodshed, just for like ritualistic purposes to conjure all these dark entities and Goatman and whatever else we got?
I will answer by saying this. Why do we call it the Holocaust? Literally, like we call it the Holocaust. Why? Since we're on YouTube, the funny mustache man gave his speech on the final solution in Nuremberg, Germany. The stage he was on was patterned after a particular colonnade, but specifically it was a temple built in Turkey, right? That was transplanted and brought up to Berlin. I can literally see the name of it. That'll come to me later. But the temple that it was on is what he was based, is that, like, the whole setup was designed to look like that. The altar in that temple was a Holocaust altar. A Holocaust sacrifices, meaning are sacrifices that are burned in fire. My answer to your question is an unabashedly yes. It is not a coincidence that we call what happened in World War II the Holocaust, because it was. It was a ritual sacrifice. There is a reason why the first time we started getting these really, truly mass paranormal events, it coincides with the Armenian genocide by the Ottoman Turks, right? These are not unrelated ideas. The fact that we've been kept in perpetual, wars are always fought, but not on the scales that we're doing them in. And it does seem as if a lot of these events are not just for profit, which they are, but also may be mass sacrifices.
Right. And there are other things that are going on that are mass sacrifice. Let's say the pokey, if y'all know what I mean, the hokey pokey, that kind of stuff. I mean, we don't know the enormity. That's not even a word. We don't know the scale really of what is being done to us. That's why I do not consent. Okay. To all the trickery and the mind manipulation and the wars and all this stuff. Like, it's just so dark and dim and evil. And there's no telling what all's going on around us, Jason.
Yeah,
and thank you for
it's very much by design.
Yes, thank you, Forrest Louis, for that super sticker. We appreciate you. Yes. So, it's devastating to think about it. But with all of this, I mean, I'm going to call it blood sacrifice with all the wars that are going on and the bombings and oh my gosh, all that stuff. I mean, it's very ritualistic, and it is potentially opening up portals where all these dark entities could come into our space, into our world.
It was the Pergamon altar. I forgot the word. It was Pergamos is the city that the altar was originally in. And here's the thing. That is the reason the book of Revelation, when Jesus is writing the letters to the 7 churches, he talks about how Pergamos sits in the shadow of the seat of Satan. That is, the Pergamon altar is literally what he was referring to in that letter. So that altar was transported to Berlin in the late 1800s, early 1900s, and became the Berlin Museum. So it was very influential to the German people at the time. So, which is why he chose it. But that's the point, right? These things, these ideas, these concepts are all connected. These events, these locations, they're all connected. It isn't a coincidence that goatmen are seen around bridges, particularly iron truss bridges. They have the same sort of mythology around them. Why? Because there is a ritual there, right? There is a connection. There is a reality to these things. These are not coincidences. And we'd be in a lot better place if we realized that we are dealing with the reality of the supernatural, that it's not just in our heads. They're not just stories. These are real things, real entities with real ambitions, and they are not in your interest.
That's right. They're not in our interest, and I do not consent. Thank you, Shane from West Coast Dogman Project. You guys go subscribe to his channel over there, West Coast Dogman Project. That's Shane. Okay. He's been here at Space Out Radio, y'all. He's awesome. Thank you, Shane. Boots on the ground. Somebody said hooves on the ground. That was Long Island Bigfoot. Y'all subscribe to him too.
Yes.
Y'all are killing me, Smalls, man. Y'all are so funny. We're having a good time over here. Even though we're talking about dark stuff, Jason, it's actually such a pleasure to get to talk to you about this kind of stuff. I mean, I don't hear a whole lot of people talking about Goatman. Okay. And I just felt an itch to talk about Goatman tonight. And so I contacted you, and you have delivered, Jason, big time. You are such a pleasure to have on my show and to have another amazing conversation. It's always fun. Now we have about a couple more minutes. Tell my audience actually a little bit about your shows that you do and your books and where to find them.
So again, my books, you can find all of them on Amazon. Like I said, Metroplex Monsters is basically everywhere. And as far as my shows, again, every Tuesday I'm on with Dean, Dr. Dean Bertram on Mysterious Library, where we go through, we review books and documentaries. We've been doing a lot of documentaries because we've been very busy. But we use those and we review them, and then we talk about the subject matter, right? Paranormal, ancient astronaut theories. We just did a thing on the Nephilim this last week, and that's what we talk about, and it's a lot of fun. We try to have a very different conversation than what's often had. And then on Wednesdays, which is why I'm here. It's why I love your show.
Exactly. Thank you.
I'm live, and we're now moving to lives. Jason Mclean Questions Everything was largely pre-recorded for most shows with one live, but we're switching up. We're going to do lives every Wednesdays, and I'm going to start doing pop-ups most evenings, not Tuesdays because I'm busy over with Dean. But a quick 10-15 minute pop-up just to talk about things that have occurred in the day. Not all of it necessarily paranormal. That, again, that sort of 50,000 foot view of what's actually happening around us, things we need to care about, the whole 9 yards.
That's awesome. Okay, what about your books? Because I have Metroplex Monsters here, and it's this is one of the most comprehensive books about, especially the Texas cryptids. Where can people find that, Jason?
Again, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, basically everywhere for Metroplex Monsters.
All over.
It's all over. But I am working on a new one. It's going to be, it's different, but I'm trying to make it visually different, and it'll tie into Siru. And start, so a lot of that's sort of on, that channel's on hiatus for a little bit right now. So when we get it back up and running, once everything's back up and running, we can come back on and talk about it. But that's the next book. It's going to be much more visual. I want it to look and read very differently from what's out there right now. So it'll be a lot of fun.
Okay. Well, you take such a wonderful approach to all of these topics. I love doing shows with you. The Giant of Kandahar show is one of my favorite shows I've ever done with you. That was such a great one. Fun. You really bring the biblical aspect to all of this paranormal stuff. It's all so connected. It's amazing. I just love doing shows with you, Jason. Please come back and hang out with me soon here at spacedoutradio. Okay. And on my channel, The Cryptid Huntress. Okay. And everybody go subscribe to his channel, Jason Mclean Questions Everything, and support Jason, you guys. Okay. Thank you so much for being here tonight, Jason.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
I'll see you soon. Okay. Thank you. Bye. Okay. Bye. All right, y'all. That was amazing. Please don't forget that right after this show, we have After Hours with a fantastic program for us tonight. Next week, I have Michael Roser coming on Saturday night. He's with Dark Hour Paranormal. He's one of my buddies that was with me in Montauk, New York this past week. And we had some very interesting experiences together, and he's awesome. So until then, you guys come see me over on my channel, The Cryptid Huntress. I actually have my friend Nigel coming on this Wednesday. He channels a reptilian commander of a reptilian spaceship that oversees up there. Actually, the good ones. Okay, so that's going to be a really interesting show on Wednesday. So y'all please come join me 1 p.m. Eastern, and then I have another show Wednesday or Thursday at 8 p.m. But until then, I'm the Cryptid Huntress. I'm Jessica Jones. I'm headed off the trails, you guys. Y'all have a great week. And go out there, lock your doors, watch out for Goatman. Don't be conjuring anything that don't need conjuring. I love you guys. Have a good night. Bye.